I'm in stinky oud mood. Will these two fragrance options satisfy my cravings? Hello, hello, welcome back to Seldomly Off, and I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is the first impression comparison between Xerjoff Luxor and Ajmal Mukhallat Dahn Oudh. In this video series, I compare and give my first impressions on two fragrances, usually in sample form, that I selected to cover a specific topic. This is not a fragrance battle. We're not here to decide which of the two fragrances is better. We're here to talk about the wear experience and to open the conversation. If you've been watching this channel, you may know that recently I did a first impression comparison video between Frédéric Malle's The Night and Nishane Mana. In that video, I was completely stunned by the Frédéric Malle offering. I basically fell completely in love with the oud component of The Night, a very stinky, very animalic, very cheesy type of barnyardy oud. And since then, I've been thinking about that fragrance or fragrances like that. Nothing that I smelled up to this point has really ever compared to that fragrance in terms of nuance of stinkiness, in terms of nuance of oud. Absolutely gorgeous stuff. Again, I fell completely in love. The thing that was holding me back, and that is still holding me back from a purchase, is the insanely stupidly high price of the fragrance. We're talking 850 euros or dollars for 50 mls and upwards of like 1400 for 100 mls. So we're talking completely ridiculous pricing, almost to an unethical level, and I'm just not ready to stomach that sort of thing. In the meantime, in a pretty consistent manner throughout my reviews and first impression comparison videos, you guys suggest that I pick up or at least sample Xerjoff Luxor. And I finally got a sample. Here it is, and I can't wait to smell it. Apparently, this one here is one of the more animalic, more tough to swallow Xerjoffs, and even the niche fragrance collector, my buddy Marcelo, says that this is basically elite general level. So I'm really curious to get my nose on this. I'm into stinky fragrances, as you all may know, and Xerjoff has had some stinky fragrances. They have a little bit of a daring edge to them, but most of their stinky fragrances are basically covered in this veil of sweetness or this veil of accessibility that significantly tones down the unapproachable level. I totally get it. They do it because otherwise these fragrances would not sell. And apparently, as I said, Luxor might be just the exception to this rule. It might be one of the more unapproachable Xerjoffs in their lineup. I didn't really know what to pair Luxor to, so I started ravaging my sample mountain when I came across this Ajmal sample here that a fragrance buddy of mine has sent me. This was a while back. I've never put my nose on this just because I get a lot of samples at the time, and it's really, again, fatiguing to sit down and just sample everything in a proper manner. Also, because I tend to want to save these samples for these sort of videos. And in order to give you a real first impression comparison, I have to shelve these samples and kind of forget about them. In some cases, I get really excited about the sample and really curious, so I tend to get to that video pretty quickly. In other cases, the samples don't really spark my interest, like in the case of this Ajmal. Ajmal is a very complicated brand. They have a million fragrances out there. Some of them are maybe clones, some other are pretty high-end. It's really hard to navigate their offerings, and I didn't know which one this was. I didn't feel like looking it up, so I just kind of shelved the sample without really thinking about it. But for whatever reason, when I was preparing this video and I stumbled upon this sample, I discovered that this one here is actually one of the better Ajmals out there. And looking at the notes, it appears to be a very oudy fragrance, and Ajmal is known for their oudy fragrances. This might be a pleasant surprise after all, and this actually is also one of the more expensive fragrances from Ajmal, so my hopes are pretty high on this. And Ajmal is a company known for their ouds, natural smelling ouds, maybe even actual natural ouds. So I don't know, this one here might be just the fragrance that I've been looking for to scratch that stinky oud itch. Before we start, let me just remind you how all this works. I'll be spraying these two fragrances directly on skin, left and right arm. I'll be talking about the very first opening, my experiences with the house, my history with the house, if I have any. Then I'll step away for a couple hours on average, come back, talk about the dry down, give my forecasted longevity, give my forecasted value for money, talk about the use cases and versatility, and ultimately give my recommendation about these two samples. Okay, these videos tend to be a little bit longer, so let's just dive right into it. I'll be spraying the Ajmal on my right arm and the Xerjoff on my left arm. We'll start out with the Ajmal because I'm very curious about what this is all about. Just to be clear, the full name of this Ajmal, and I'll say it just once, is Mukhallat Dahn Oudh Moattaq. And given the fact that that's an absolute mouthful and it took way more takes than I'm willing to admit to fully pronounce the name, from now on I'll be just referring to this as the Ajmal. So let's get to it. Let's give it a couple sprays on my right arm and see what this is all about. All right, let's see. All right, time to see what this famous natural oud is all about. Okay, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised. This is a very funky, very fermented type of oud. It does kind of remind me of the night, maybe not as complex. Again, it's just a very first impression. I haven't dug my nose in there, but it has this fermented, a little bit cheesy type of nuance. I'm definitely getting flashbacks from the night. I really like this sort of smell, and I don't have a fragrance in my repertoire that smells like this, and I'm really eager to get something that's high quality though. I want something with natural oud. I want something that smells proper, you know? And I really have to verify if this actual Ajmal has natural oud. This actually retails pretty expensive, as I said in my intro, at least compared to the other Ajmals. It's really hard to pinpoint Ajmal's pricing given that they're almost a clone brand, I would say. Fragrances range from 15 bucks up to like 250, 300 bucks. This one here I saw for about 180 bucks. Is this real? Is this true? I don't know. It's really hard to get. I actually could not find a place to purchase it locally, so I wouldn't even know exactly how to acquire it. My local discounter features Ajmal, but they mostly have the super cheap, the really clone-ish looking fragrances. Yeah, this is super interesting, right up my alley. This is perfectly funky, really, really fun. This is a fun fragrance to sample. I do feel that it's a little less intense than the night. The night had a very, very potent, very cheesy type of aspect. This feels a little bit more refined. It still has a very oily, fermented sort of vibe, but there's something weird about it. There's something a little bit off about it. It might be cleaned up, it might be more refined. And I'm fully aware that when talking oud, there's no real standard oud smell. They come from different trees with different levels of infection, different areas of the world with different humidity. Even the distillation process, as per my understanding, can be very, very long or short according to the type of flavor of oud you want. So again, there's no real standard oud smell, but this has the same sort of scent profile from the night, but it's a little less rough. It's a little less complex. It feels less deep. I'm not really sure why I'm getting this feeling, but it feels like this note has been pressed thin like a sheet of paper. Like I can smell through it, not into it, if it makes sense. It kind of reminds me of the oud sensation that I get from the Kadalaj pure mystical Indian oud there, that really cheap fragrance that I got from Notino for about 40 bucks. That one too is very fun, very addicting type of smell, very fermented, and it kind of reminds me of this Ajmal. This might be a little bit of a higher tier than the Kadalaj, but it still features something in here that smells not fake, but it smells off. I don't know, it smells a little bit plasticky compared to the night. There's something that smells a tiny bit rubbery, and again, it might totally be the oud type, it might be the variety of oud, I'm not really sure. All I can say right now is that The Night by Frédéric Malle has this super deep, like immense feeling, almost like looking at a giant peak. I get this very euphoric feeling when looking at a mountain. I love trekking, I love mountaineering, I love the mountains in general, and when looking at a giant mountain, I almost get this feeling that I am experiencing something that is way bigger than me. And The Night kind of gave me that impression. It felt like a scent that was deep and dense like a black hole, that there was no end to the complexity. This one here doesn't give me the exact same feeling. It has the same sort of tone, has the same fermented aspect that I really like and that triggers that immediate sense of curiosity, but it's not as complex. And again, these are just my impressions. I'm not an oud expert at all. For all I know, the oud in the Ajmal might be even higher quality than the one in the Frédéric Malle. But going back to the scent profile for this Ajmal, yes, all I'm getting is this very fermented, very funky, very beautiful at the same time type of oud. I like this stuff a lot. I could probably pull this off. I could probably wear it. I bet that in the air around me, it smells a lot better than it smells on skin. I still think that it smells pretty good on skin. I do like the scent. It doesn't feel revolting. It doesn't feel like poop or anything like that. It's pretty barnyardy. It's very oily, very humid, and very wet feeling, but it's not stinky per se. It has this, again, very alluring, very mysterious, very inviting sort of smell. You have to be into oud, by all means. This is not clean, this is not Western. You have to be into funk to like this thing. I also want to say another couple things about this scent profile. Number one is that the projection is pretty contained. The sillage is pretty intimate. In order to properly smell the scent, I really have to bring my arm up to my nose. And this, again, is a stark difference from the night. It might be just natural oud, it might not be very projecting, it might be a lot more concentrated than the night, I don't know. But I'm getting this impression that this is a very concentrated, very oily type of scent that you really need to get close to fully appreciate. In the air though, as I said before, it might turn into this very beautiful, very inviting type of scent. I can't smell it around me. I don't know what the sillage is like. I have no one to tell me about the thing. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that in a similar vein to the night, the funkiness, that very sharp, pungent cheesiness is quickly fading away by the minute almost. And I feel that this is also becoming a lot smoother, a lot more wearable as the time ticks away. And it might be just one of those cases where this natural oud just behaves like this. Again, I'm fairly new to this scent profile, but in the case of the night, as the scent dried down, the oud became smoother and literally drier smelling and drier feeling. And it ultimately became this very dry, dusty, almost ashy wood smell. Very, very beautiful, especially when paired with that magnificent rose in the dry down. And this Ajmal might just follow suit in that sort of way. Actually, I'm sort of remembering that there was a strong rose feature in the fragrance notes for this Ajmal. As of now, I'm picking up on zero rose. It's just beautiful oud, very, very funky type of oud. Okay, I need to give Ajmal a break, so let's move on to Xerjoff Luxor. We're going to be spraying this on my left arm. Very excited about this because it's apparently, again, one of the more stinky Xerjoffs out there. Let's give it a couple sprays. Powerful atomizer. While I wait for the initial alcohol evaporation, all I can say is that I can easily smell it in the air. It's much more potent than the Ajmal projection-wise. It actually smells a lot different. It's less sharp, less cheesy, less fermented. It's still very barnyardy, but in a very, very different way. It smells a lot more dusty and dry. There's almost like a leather component to it. The Ajmal in the opening felt like a single oud note. The Xerjoff feels like a much more complex fragrance with much more components and nuances. Really interesting. I really like it actually. It's pretty funky and loud. I was expecting something a little bit different. I was expecting a lot more sweetness and fruity notes, a little bit more wetness. This is a very, very dry fragrance. I seem to remember that in the notes for Luxor, it was mostly spices. I don't recall any sweet notes or fruity notes, so it kind of makes sense. This kind of reminds me of Africa Olifant. I have this vague memory of Africa Olifant, but it kind of reminds me of that. Very dry sort of hay. It's a very dry, earthy, kind of poopy feeling. It's funky for sure. I like it a lot. It's really interesting. It doesn't smell like other Xerjoff fragrances whatsoever. The typical Xerjoff DNA is not here. I'm not even sure who perfumed this because on Parfum and Fragrantica this fragrance doesn't even feature a perfumer. I'm not even sure if it's Chris Maurice or just some other anonymous ghost perfumer here, but it doesn't smell like your typical Xerjoff fragrance at all. It doesn't have the sweet musky base which is immediately detectable in most other Xerjoff offerings. This one here smells very, very dry, very leathery and very masculine. Actually, not masculine, scratch that. This is a very unisex smell. It's very abstract. It smells masculine maybe because of this leather component to it and the dryness, maybe the complete lack of sweetness. Really complex, quite interesting. Yeah, this has a lot of nuances here. I'm picking up on a lot of components. There's definitely spices. I'm not really sure which spices. It smells dusty, so it might be some sort of a cardamom or cinnamon or something like that that has a very dusty type of a wispy feeling. Also, I can easily detect what is probably an oud component. I'm not really sure if real or not. There's also some sort of leather accord. It might just be saffron or something like that that plays the role of leather. And I don't know, it's really coming across as multi-layered, very, very complex, and this is a stark difference from most Xerjoff fragrances. And again, I'm not bashing Xerjoff. They are normally a brand that offers very mass appealing, very likable fragrances, and this is a stark difference. I'm super happy about this. Really happy to have 5 mLs. I'll definitely be going through many wears of this. Now, I have to say that the smell per se doesn't really come across as clean. There's something weird about it. It kind of has a an underlying stench. It's not foul, rotten, or pissy in any way. It just smells kind of dirty, like a general dirtiness. And I'm not really sure if I could pull this off. This is a very specific type of smell. And the way it's sort of embedding into my skin, the way my skin is seemingly very quickly absorbing it, it's a very strange thing because my skin will end up smelling like this. It's not fragrance. It's more like it's more becoming like my smell. And I'm not really sure if I feel like smelling so dirty in a way. It almost feels like I've been rolling around in a field. There's a distinct dry earthiness that I'm having a really hard time describing. You can smell spices under this like hay heap or like mountain of dirt, but it smells weird. It doesn't smell like a fragrance. For one, I really do have to applaud Xerjoff right away because this is one of the more unique fragrances that I've smelled recently. I have nothing in my collection that smells even remotely like this. This is a very intriguing type of smell. I'm very, very attracted to it. But I'm weird. I like very sticky smells. And again, as much as I'm attracted to it, I'm not really sure if I could pull it off. Maybe I just have to get used to this scent profile. Really interesting stuff. I can't think of any situation where it would be okay to smell like this. And even if I were to wear a super high-end tuxedo for a very elegant evening, I'm not really sure that smelling like this would be passable. And it's because the skin kind of smells like this. I think I would just end up smelling kind of dirty and unwashed when wearing this. Really intriguing scent profile, super magnetic. I can't stop smelling it and I can't wait to give this a full wear, probably tomorrow. This is really interesting, really, really cool. In a similar way to the Ajmal, as this Xerjoff is drying down minute by minute, it's quickly losing a lot of the funk. It's becoming a lot smoother and more palatable. Now I'm getting a little bit of something that reminds me of a licorice root. Also maybe dried fruits, like really dry, not like moist dates or something like that, like true dried fruits. Under this like layer of powdery dustiness. This dust in particular feels extremely fine, like a finely grounded cinnamon stick or something like that. It feels like it's super volatile, that it gets everywhere, almost like a cloud. I like this a lot, really interesting stuff. And as of now, Luxor is getting a big thumbs up for me. Okay, I'm a little bit fatigued. I think I need a break. I'm gonna go eat something, watch a couple episodes of Dr. House, and report back in the dry down. Okay, I'm back. It's been a couple hours, 2 very pleasing hours at that. I've been constantly smelling my arms. These are really interesting scents. I like them both a lot. I have some observations. Let's start off with the Ajmal. The first thing to say about the Ajmal is that it transitioned massively top to bottom to the point where now it's basically a completely different scent. Now, the funky oudiness, that cheesy oudiness, the fermented aspect is almost completely gone. This smells like rose. This smells like a very beautiful, powdery, rosy, woody fragrance now. It's really interesting. I like it a lot, but I'm a little bit sad that the oud just kind of like vanished into thin air. After about 40 minutes, it was basically completely gone. It's a super pretty scent now. It almost leans a little bit feminine. Well, it doesn't actually, because this is still very, very unisex and very woody at that. It has this very oriental, Middle Eastern sort of feel. It doesn't really remind me of anything. It wears insanely dry. This oud component dried up in a very similar manner to the night. The scent profile as a whole became very dry, very dusty, almost to an ashy degree. It's not as bitter. The night had a little bit more of a vetiver undertone. This one here feels very smooth, very powdery. A lot of florals have actually surfaced in the scent profile. The main one being rose, but I also feel that there's some sort of an iris or some sort of a dusty flower, very dry, very crackly type of flower. It feels like a little bit like a purpurri of sorts. It's very beautiful, very warm smelling. It's almost radiating off my skin, kind of like warm sand. It's an insanely elegant, very tranquil type of scent. This very harsh transition of the Ajmal actually creates almost an issue. Normally, I really like transitioning scents. I really like scents that evolve, but I tend to like scents that evolve telling a story. I don't really get any story from this Ajmal. This is a very perfumey perfume in a very Oriental, Middle Eastern type of way. And the issue lies in the fact that the scent is almost unrecognizable top to bottom. So if you bought the scent for the top, you're going to be disappointed in the longevity of that note because the bottom doesn't smell anything like that. If you instead like the bottom, you're gonna have to basically sit through the top and wait for it to sort of dissipate. These scent profiles like this make for a very difficult wear, like on a day-to-day basis, because unless you're wearing this at home and just sitting around for that meditative, relaxing experience where you can really fully take in the transition, wearing this outside, out and about, is very difficult, because if you plan to wear the top, then it won't last long. If you plan to wear the bottom, then you have to deal with the top. Again, this might be just my problem, but I do think that linear fragrances, very predictable, very stable fragrances, have a place in a more utilitarian sort of wear. Other than that, the Ajmal is very beautiful. I actually really like it. It's fairly soft, very, very intimate. It doesn't shout or anything like that. The projection was never loud to begin with, but it stays even more intimate as the scent dries down. The projection curve is actually fairly well tuned. There's no abrupt drop in sillage. There's no real jarring difference in the wear experience, which ultimately I think is a good thing, and it makes for a much more enjoyable, linear, predictable wear. Another thing to note about the Ajmal is that the scent profile as a whole smells relatively natural, maybe except for that plasticky, rubbery feeling that the Oudh had upon initial spraying. I'm not really sure why I'm getting this feeling. It's not like I'm super good at detecting naturals or anything like that. It might be due to the way the scent projects, or rather lacks projection. It kind of smells like it's lacking those boosting compounds or components that really just push the projection to outer space. It's a really refreshing type of wear experience. Okay, let's shift our attention from the Ajmal to Luxor. Luxor is a very beautiful scent. I really like it, even in the dry down. I do feel that this has fully dried down. It's a lot more linear, it's a lot more predictable, it's a lot more stable than the Ajmal. The scent profile, top to bottom, has not changed too much. A lot of the funkiness has subsided in a much slower manner than the Ajmal. Now it's a beautiful, dusty, woody, a little bit dirty type of scent. It smells like a powder of dust, kind of like before, but even more dry. There's a little bit of a leather component, which is very rugged, very primal, very raw. It feels like a leather hide that's been sitting in the sun, just like crackling up and just drying up. Before taking a break, I mentioned how the scent profile was almost embedding into my skin, and now it's even more so. The whole thing feels like my skin. It feels like my skin smelling like this. It doesn't smell like a fragrance that's sitting on my skin like an oil, like a powder, or even like a fog cloud, as I usually mention. It just smells like my skin radiating this smell. My skin just kind of smells like I've been out in the field doing manual labor under the sun, getting dirty with dirt or sand. It has a very, very strong musky component. It's not pissy or sweaty at all. It's just very briny, very salty to a degree. It kind of smells like dried up sweat, or dried up sweaty hands that have been inside leather gloves. I don't know, it's really, really weird. It's really interesting. Again, super unique, and I have no other fragrance in my wardrobe that smells just like this. It's so unique, in fact, that I'm really considering buying a bottle of this, despite it not being cheap. Luxor is one of those fragrances that is easily to find at discounters, but the price is never really discounted. I'm not even sure why though, because this is not even a popular fragrance. There's hardly anyone talking about this, other than the odd review out there on YouTube. It's a really strange scent. I do really like it. It smells like no other Xerjoff in the catalog, as far as I smelled at least. Super unique, very, very unique wear experience. Again, very dusty, and the way it really embeds into your skin, or at least on my skin, it's very unique. I really want to get feedback on this, because I would like to wear this. I would like to wear this around. This could be probably even worn in the summer. It does a little bit scream winter given the scent profile per se, but this dusty, dry, sweat, sun-baked skin type of smell, I feel that would really suit summer days and just work really well outdoors in the sun. Really cool stuff. As far as performance goes, I can say that the projection is much louder than the Ajmal, but it's a little bit more contained than your usual Xerjoff fragrances. This is no Erba Pura, this is no beast mode fragrance. It's a very strange smell, and I'm actually happy it's a little bit more contained, because otherwise this would be completely unwearable. It's also very magnetic, at least to my nose. I kept smelling my arm throughout these 2 hours. It's a really beautiful combination of spicy, dry, woody, leathery, a little bit funky, super unique, Really, really interesting. I'm very, very surprised by Xerjoff in general and by Luxor. Really cool stuff. Again, I can't stress enough how impressed I am by this scent. Ultimately, I have to say that despite these two fragrances being both funky, they're funky in very different ways. They wear completely differently. The Ajmal on one hand opens up incredibly fermented, incredibly cheesy, very, very interesting. I really like the natural oud smell, but it dries down to this elegant, rosy, powdery sort of thing. The Luxor doesn't really achieve that fermented aspect of the Ajmal. There's a strong oud component in here, but everything is drier, much more dusty, and the wear experience is a lot more linear and predictable. That being said, I feel that the use cases and versatility for these two fragrances are actually quite similar. I'm not really sure where I would wear either of these. The Ajmal, on one hand, is very difficult to pull off due to its massively transitioning scent profile. It's very, very different top to bottom, and you kind of have to plan around it. Luxor, on the other hand, is much more stable and linear, but it's also much more weird. I feel that the wear experience for Luxor is super unique because of the way it kind of like bonds to your skin. It's very, very strange. The scent profile is not off-putting. I do like it, but it can come off as off-putting. I would definitely not wear this on day-to-day activities or at the office. This is absolutely not work safe. It's not even good for the gym. It doesn't really have that energetic sort of vibe. I'm not even sure I would be able to pull this off in an evening sort of situation because, again, it has this very strange, dirty sort of smell. And unless the culture calls for this, and again, in Western culture, it doesn't really work out, but unless your culture really calls for this sort of smell and it's much more common, I just can't see myself pulling this off. It's not even very romantic or sexy. It's a little bit animalic, it's dirty, and you really have to be into this funky, dirty, hay, dirt, earthy type of flavor. It's really strange. I like it a lot. If I buy this, I'm not really sure how much I would wear it. It's just a scent for me. And it's completely different from something like Silver Oud by Amouage. That one there is much more likable, has a vanilla undertone, it's a very sexy scent. This is just dirty. I'm not really sure. For all I know, I might even be getting super positive feedback from this, and that will completely change my mind. If that's the case, at the very least, I'll be pinning a comment down below just to notify you guys about the difference in external perception. Before I close off this very fun experience with my following recommendations, I just want to touch upon the prices for these two. Again, the Ajmal is a little bit of a mystery. I'm not really sure how expensive this is in your country. Where I live, I double checked, this retails for about 180 francs, 180 euros. If you can find it, that is. I'm not really sure where to get it. I've only seen sites that seem to be importing it from who knows where. In that case, I would have to pay duties and taxes, so again, your mileage may vary. In the case of Xerjoff, price is a lot more predictably calculated. This retails for about 200 bucks, best case scenario at discounters. I think that the official price on this on the Xerjoff website is more like 300 to 350 for 50 ml. So it's a little bit more pricey. I do think it's kind of worth it just because it's so unique. The bottle design and the bottle presentation for Xerjoff is always mega. And in the case of Luxor, this one actually reminds me of those new Chemi lines. So really, really cool. Okay, time to wrap up this video. I think it's been super, super long. Final recommendations are the following. These are really fun scents if you like funky fragrances. At the very least, they managed to scratch my itch for oud, specifically the Ajmal. The very funky fermented oud in the beginning was beautiful. I just wished it lasted a little bit longer. In the case of Luxor, I am very pleasantly surprised with the house of Xerjoff. This was a beautiful discovery, and I'm very thankful to all of you guys who have recommended it. It's so good, in fact, that I might even get a bottle. Overall, I always recommend to get out of your comfort zone, and even if you do not like stinky scents, it's always good to explore something different. You might learn to like something like this, or you might just confirm that you don't. I think that getting a sample of these is fairly inexpensive, fairly approachable. If nothing else, these will be a very fun sampling experience that you can share with your fragrance buddies. Just have a laugh at it, have a laugh at how stinky these are and how unwearable they are. I personally like these. I can't wait to wear Luxor a little bit more. I'll definitely be giving this at least 2 good full wears just to properly understand where I can actually wear this and how I can actually pull this off in public. If you like this type of content, if you like this type of video, feel free to subscribe. It always helps the channel and it's massively appreciated. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. Many more videos to come as per usual. See you in the next one and cheers.